Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, and we are in a sequence of interviews with folks who are returning to the program to share more about the work that they are doing to help all of us to work through our day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month. And what is amazing to me is how fast everything is moving. My calendar is smoking. Because the days are flying by so fast. It hasn't caught fire yet, and God forbid it should, especially out here in California. But we're going to talk today with a returning guest, and I'm very glad that he's back with us again. Richard Allen is joining us. He's the author of Keep Calm and Cope with Grief, 9 chapters for managing fear and grief when losing a parent or loved one. And Richard, thank you so much for joining us again from not exactly war-torn the Southeast, but it certainly, I'm sure, feels a little bit like that with hurricane season still upon us and a very devastating one rolling through your neck of the woods.
That's right, Richard. Thanks for having me back. Yeah, we got very lucky. Hurricane Helene went west of us by, I don't know, maybe about 50 miles or so. So we were very lucky.
Well, what's really interesting, and of course, I haven't heard any of the statistics other than I suppose I did hear one about, the billions of dollars it's going to take to bring things back to normal. I have not heard any statistics yet on loss of life at this particular point, but I think that there were some lives that were lost. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about here on this program, not specifically tied to the hurricane, but just in general, in terms of the fact that that's one of those constants of the universe. Everything's changing, everything's moving, and so forth, as we have talked in the last couple of interviews that we have done. Life doesn't last forever, that we have to, I think, sort of come to grips with what the realities are of this world. But I don't think that Richard makes it that much any easier just because we understand it intellectually, that it makes it any easier that, grandma, grandpa, mom and dad, sis, brother, and I'm 64. And I've already lost one sister and a parent, but the intellectual part of it, I guess, okay, it's great that we have that maybe, but it does not placate the emotional part of who we are, does it?
No, it doesn't. I mean, it's still a shock. In fact, I spoke to a lady this morning, and like most people, she had lost several loved ones, and she said it doesn't get any easier the more often it happens. It's still traumatic. It's still devastating. It's an emotion that we experience that I don't think we can ever get used to, right? It's on so many levels. I mean, you're missing them for so many reasons.
Yeah.
And it just crushes you, and it's hard to continue in life, but we must. And it's up to us to find a way to get through losing a loved one and coping with grief.
And this also transcends even to our pets, doesn't it? The grief is still though it's different, it's still the same.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I actually felt guilty a couple of years ago. It was January 2022. We lost our dog Amadeus, and it's still grief, right? But for whatever the reasons, I cried so much more for losing my dog than I did when I lost my dad in 2020. And in that respect, I felt guilty, Richard. I mean, I was crying for weeks, every day for hours because I'd lost my dog. And yeah, I cried every day because I lost my dad too, but it hurt me even more for losing my dog. And there is an amount of grief, amount of guilt that came in with that. Because I thought, why is it affecting me so much more than I would losing my dad? But grief is grief, and I don't think anybody on this planet has all the answers to it. Like I say, we just have to try and figure out a way of coping,
Yeah. And that's what your book is about, helping people to, cope. And obviously the first part of that, which I say I probably didn't do too well when my grandmother passed away, and I was still a kid. I was anything but calm, to the extent that I was almost removed from the church because I would not calm down. How do you do that when, in a lot of instances, the grief is so heavy? What are what are your suggestions? Because to tell someone, I'm sorry for your loss, uh, almost as if, what, you had something to do with their demise? Is that why you're apologizing? You know, because a lot of times someone in grief is going to get, it can be, very angry. I mean, emotions are like all at the surface, aren't they? So
Exactly.
how do we stay calm? I mean, I just lost somebody.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, the Swiss psychiatrist, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she had the 5 stages of grief, didn't she? And one of those stages is anger. We go through denial, bargaining, anger, depression, and acceptance. And many psychiatrists and psychologists believe now there are more than 5 stages, but certainly one of them is anger. Um, we are angry, and a lot of people, whether they had faith, they believed in God, but they turn away from God because they're so angry. Why did you do this to me? Why did you take my loved one away from me and give them so much pain and me so much pain? It's not fair. And they get so angry. And, again, we need to find what works for us, what can help us, what can, I wouldn't say cure us because I believe that grief is always with us, right? But we have to be able to control it. We have to be able to live on. Um, Having said that, we all go through this in totally different ways, totally individual ways. My sister and I, we lost our dad in 2020 and we're coping in different ways. In fact, when I spoke to my sister, I think it was in February, no, it was in June this year. She told me, I haven't started to grieve yet, Richard, for the loss of our dad. Now, I began my grieving process straight away, but my sister hasn't. She said, I just can't do it. It's just too traumatic for me. And she's kind of blocked it out, shut it out. But that's how she's coping with it. And I guess that's okay if that's working for her. But there are many, many things that we can do. And going to your point, if you're angry or if you're upset, I think, going for a long walk can help. Other people might go to the gym and lift a lot of weights or do some physical activity to get all that energy out of the system, just to, let it out, so to speak. Talk to family and friends, watch something on TV that can help relax you or calm you, or maybe watch a funny movie just to try and get you out of that funk that you're in where you are angry and upset. There are so many things that we can do. Me personally, I've turned to nature. So I like to sit outside in my backyard. I like to watch the animals, watch the weather, and just being in that calming, relaxing place. To me, that's my church, my backyard. I love being there. It helps me connect to myself, helps me connect to my dad, and to my faith. And it just calms me. In those moments when I am upset and even angry, I can sit outside and within 15, 20 minutes, I can find that peace again. But again, it's up to us to find what works for us. Another important thing, Richard, is not to give up. Don't just put your head in the sand or lock yourself away or shut yourself out from your family and friends. Don't give up. You'll find a way. We have to. And sadly, as you mentioned before, life isn't on this planet is not eternal. We will have that day when it's our time and we
Yeah.
will cross over, but until that day comes, we have to keep going. We really do.
Yeah, it is a process that again, it's part of our lives. But at the same time, it's one of those things that it's every person or animal, we'll go there, that passes, it's a different experience. And I know that as this person that you quoted says, that doesn't get any easier. I've even made that same comment, and at the same time, I say, and I really don't want it would not be, I don't think it would be healthy if it did get easier. I think there would be something wrong with us in one sense,
Mhm.
knowing what makes us human, if it did get easier.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, only yesterday I was crying because sadly my wife Alison, she lost her parents recently. She lost a dad in 2021. She lost a mum in 2023. And sorry, it's still raw, Richard. It really is. And yesterday I was on Facebook, the way you watch those funny videos on Facebook, and there was a song that was being played, and it was You Are My Sunshine. And
Mm.
Alison told me that her mum, Doris, used to sing it to her when she was a baby. And Doris was such a sweet lady. And she was my American mother, and it just brought it all back. And it still does. It's
Yeah.
still raw. When I hear that song, it reminds me of Doris and my wife, Alison. It's very hard. But I think it hurts so much, Richard. I'm saying this again, this is all my opinion. It hurts so much because we loved them so much, and we still do. You know,
Yeah.
that's why it hurts so much.
Yeah. And it it's not one of those things that, as the old saying, time heals all wounds. This is not one of those wounds that time heals. You
No,
know,
it's not. No.
I my wife received a phone call from my mother the other day in regards to an invitation that we had extended to the family in Phoenix, and we extended it because we thought it was the right thing to do. And my mother was calling her to let her know that she wasn't going to be able to make it. I mean, they live in Phoenix, and we're here in Santa Barbara, so it's a little bit of a trip to make for Thanksgiving. But my wife made the comment. She says, "I think your mother was crying, and you might want to call her." So just the other day, it was a day or two after the fact. Just the other day, I called her. She was sounding fine. Now, granted, it's been a couple of days, and quite honestly, she may have been crying. She very well may have been crying. But the reality is that she is now without her husband, her partner of almost 62 years. And
Yeah.
she's going to have those moments. What do you recommend to someone? I mean, you yourself, just a moment ago, began to feel emotion. And by the way, you you uttered a phrase I hear often when I'm watching television programs where someone's being interviewed and they're talking about a tough subject, such as maybe the passing of someone, and they start to become emotional and they apologize. And my first thought is, so when you're with a group of people and someone tells a joke and you laugh, do you apologize for that? No.
Mhm.
And again, bear in mind, I'm not being critical here. It's just
Mhm.
an oddity from my perspective. And it's like, wait a minute, crying is part of who and what we are. Why would you apologize? People don't apologize for crying, you
Yeah.
know, unless you're going to apologize for laughing too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, off the top of my head, I would think it's because it's a sign of weakness, right? I mean, when you're crying, I know my father he was old school, my dad, very strict, born in 1941, through the Second World War. And he was just a very respected man, very old school though. And in fact, only yesterday I was talking to my wife, Alison, and said, in my whole life with my dad, I only ever saw him cry twice. He just, and that one time was when we lost our dog, and another time when he was upset with me, but it was actually his fault, and he apologized to me and he cried. So only twice has he ever cried in front of me. And my dad kind of instilled with me, stiff upper lip, be strong, don't show your weakness. And I think when we cry, I don't know, maybe it's because we feel we're being weak and we're
Mm.
apologetic because we don't want to show a weakness. But you're absolutely right. What I know now more than ever, it's okay to cry, especially when I'm talking about my dad or a loved one. I mean, I want to talk about my dad. I want to talk about Doris, Alison's mother. I want to talk about Mel, Alison's father. Three amazing people, full of love for life, and they cared for us so much. we owe them so much. So yeah, I want to share all the stories. And even if it is hard, if it does make me cry, I would still do that. When I'm around other people, I want to share stories of our parents. I think it's important. Just because they're not of this earth doesn't mean they no longer exist. I'm a firm believer that there is a life after this and that they are still around us. So I want to keep talking about them, even if it does upset me.
Yeah. And I feel the same way about my father. I'm very proud to have not only had him as a parent, but I am also proud of the fact that um, though I am not junior, that they named me after him, only in reverse. His middle name was Richard. And so I take pride in that. At his memorial, I almost shouted it out at the front end of my remarks. My name is Richard Les Dugan, so that they
Yeah.
knew that I was named after him. Um, so I take pride in that, and as well as talking about my best friend Doug, who I refer to as Smokey, and knew him for 53 years. We went through school together, and we had a lot of fun together. And the list goes on of the different people. Um, do
Yeah.
you think that there are those also who feel that because they haven't, and first of all, I'll tell you that I do not feel uh, any guilt having not shed a tear for my friend Smokey, Doug, because
Mhm.
every time I think about him, it makes me laugh because of how much fun we had. But
Yeah.
do you think that there are that people need to take a look at that if they're not having those kinds of emotions, or is that strictly an individual thing? Where because grief is so personal and it's so individual that if you haven't cried, it's not there's nothing wrong with that. Whereas there are some people who think if you haven't cried, you've got a problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it is an individual thing. I personally, I don't think it is a problem as long as you're going about your life. You're still getting on. You still, whether you've got a job or whether you're communicating with your neighbors, and whether you're still being friendly in nature as a whole, then just because you haven't cried about losing a loved one, I think that's okay because, as we've said, it is individual. And out of all of the emotions that we have as a human being, I think, again, my personal opinion, grief is the most complex. There's just no two people who are going to go through it the same way. It really is something that you have to come to terms with. You have to get a handle on it yourself. And as I mentioned before, my sister has gone through it totally different to me, and that's okay. She's perfect. I mean, she's got a job. She's married. She's got two children. She's getting on with her life. That doesn't mean she doesn't miss my dad. Of course she does, but she just hasn't come to that moment yet where, and she might never, but she hasn't come to that moment, she's told me, where she wants to let it out, where she wants to let that pain release. She's keeping it inside. And that's up to my sister.
Hmm.
Um, Again, it's kind of like going back to I believe in life after this. The signs that I've had from my dad that I've seen and noticed, my sister has said that she hasn't seen any. She's had no signs from my dad, and she doesn't understand why. And again, it goes back to grief. It goes back to your beliefs, maybe. But why do things happen for me and they don't happen for my sister? You don't think there's an answer to that. I certainly don't have one. I'm looking for answers. I always am. But I haven't found one for that yet. It's just so complex. And I think we just have to accept that's what it is.
We're talking with Richard Allen, and we're talking about his the release of his book, which of course we encourage you to get a copy of, and it's called "Keep Calm and Cope with Grief: 9 Chapters for Managing Grief and Managing Fear and Grief when Losing a Parent or a Loved One." And of course, it's available through his website as well as Amazon and so forth. And his website, by the way, oh, it's so easy, kind of like mine. His is richardjohnallen.com. We'll be linked to his website as well to talk to so that you can find out more about the work that he's doing and order a copy of his book. And again, that's richardjohnallen.com. This is Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and we are here talking about grief. And it's kind of hard to talk lightly about it because it is such a heavy subject, isn't it? Are there ways to maybe not add humor, but to lighten things up a little bit because the grieving process can be so heavy?
Yeah, and you just reminded me, it was about a month ago now. I went to a local store where I live, and there was a lady there who owns the business, and she's a psychic. And we got to talking, and I said, I believe in the life after this. And she said, oh, yes, I absolutely, I always have. And anyway, the conversation went on for about 30 minutes. And she literally said to me, I enjoy going to funerals. And I said, excuse me? And she
Hmm.
said, well, I don't dress up as a clown. I don't mean it that way. And I don't go in there singing and dancing. She said, but when I go, I reassure people that this is not the end. She said, this is still part of their life. They've just moved on from this world, but they are still alive. And she said, she went on to say how she communicates with the afterlife and with loved ones for other people. She's a psychic. And I thought I'd never heard that before, Richard, where somebody says, I enjoy going to funerals. That was a new phrase for me. I wouldn't quite put it that way myself. Um, but I can understand where she's coming from because she was a huge believer in talking to the other side. And, if you've got that gift, then great. Put it to some use and maybe help other people with it. I personally have, all I can testify to is I've had signs from my dad, undisputable. I mean, I like to think that I'm logical, if something happens, right, you eliminate what it could be, all the possibilities. And once you've done your little investigation and you think, okay, this incident, there's nothing left. It must have been a sign from my dad. And that leaves me 100% to believe, yeah, this life, when we die and cross over, we do go to the other side. There is another life after this.
Hmm. Well, that's interesting that you talk about that because when my wife and I went to Ireland, and it was actually the first trip we took in the late December of 2002. It was basically for our honeymoon, back when we had a ceremony. We have since been officially married the 30th of June of this year, 2024. But we flew to Ireland. And when we were driving from Dublin down to our destination in Lismore, Ireland, in County Waterford, she wanted to stop along the way at the cemeteries. And
Mm.
now some of the cemeteries, of course, had churches that had no roofs. It was just the stone walls, and you could see where they had buried people in the floor. They buried them in the walls, and so forth. And of
Mhm.
course, then there were the laid out cemeteries with all the statuary and everything, and the stones. And the thing that at first bothered me was my first thought was, it's kind of morbid. What the heck? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized if it weren't for the people laying here in the ground, these different villages and hamlets and communities and cities and towns wouldn't exist.
Mm.
So I took a different view of it, saying, because they lived, we get to visit these towns and communities. We get to communicate and have a relationship with these people who now live here, who are uh, I can't even, they're not the ancestors. They're not, I want to say predecessors, but that's not right either because that comes before. I can't even think, but anyway, they're the offspring. They're
Yeah.
the future generations of the people that are there in those graves. And so that turned it around for me. I began to have a whole different perspective and view of the people that were lying there and the stones, even to the extent I had a dream one night while we were there. It was more an audible dream of a dear friend of ours who lived in our home and he passed away in our home in Phoenix. And we were going to even invite him to come with us on our second trip in 2004. Sadly, of course, he didn't make it in that respect. But the dream I had there in the stone cottage that we're staying in on Inishni in County Galway, I heard the voice say, and I recognized it as my friend Dave, our friend Dave, don't say anything bad around Bridget. And of course, as soon as we were taking a ferry to the Aran Islands, and we were going to Inishmore, and we were at, I want to say, the church. It was like the cemetery of the seven churches or something like that. And there
Mm.
was this stone altar with this circular stone with a hole in it. And I took a picture of it and I jokingly said, "Oh, the first wheel." And I'm just having some fun. And my wife had wandered off looking at different cemeteries, especially the ones that are, those big flat ones that they lay
Mm.
down, big stone over the top, and then they engrave it or beforehand.
Yeah.
She comes over to me and she says, "You need to come over here." And I said, okay. So I followed her over to this gravestone. She says, "Read the gravestone." The person lying there, their last name was McDonough, which is my wife's maiden name. But the McDonough that was lying there was named Bridget. I clamped my hand over my mouth and I walked away, remembering the dream, saying, "Don't say
Yeah.
anything bad around Bridget."
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, that's that is wild.
Yeah.
That you would come to a place, a foreign country. I'd never been there before. Now this situation was in the second trip, but anyway, I never dreamed of going to Ireland once, let alone twice, and going to the Aran Islands and da 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 da. And
Yeah.
then this happens. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
When you start looking at the people in your life who have passed, obviously your father and now your wife's parents,
Mm.
um, are you able to, even though the emotions may still flow, um, process it in such a way as to say, and if they hadn't come along and they hadn't gotten together and created me, and then I created my children and so forth, and we've
Mm.
done these different things and made a way for this person. In other words, you're kind of looking at the legacy that they have left behind. Because for me, it kind of fills me with a little bit of pride, not egotistical pride, mind you, but pride nonetheless.
Mm.
That I look at the family that my parents created. I mean,
Yeah.
my mother who's still alive is a great grandmother. What about you and legacy?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I have a daughter and she has a son now. So I have a grandson, but my mum and dad, that's their grandchild or great grandchild. So, and same for Alison. She's recently become a grandmother. So Alison's parents, although passed on, they are still great grandparents now to those children. Um, and I'm sure they're watching down and smiling, watching these little ones grow up the way they are and enjoying life as best they can. They're having a wonderful life. But yeah, I mean, I'd be lost without my wife, Alison. I mean, she's by absolutely 100% my soulmate, my best friend. And to think that if Doris and Mel had not had hair, where would I be now? I wouldn't have this wonderful life. I wouldn't be with my soulmate. Um, I've got no idea what it would be or what I would be doing. So I can really thank God that things happened the way they did because I met Alison and I'm with her today. So yeah, I mean, in fact, going back to my dad as well, he was born in 1941. And as you know, that was during the Second World War. And at that time in 1941, my dad was 6 months old and he was in his crib in the front living room of the house in Liverpool. And the Germans were bombing the city. And when the air raid sirens were going off and there was all panic to get into the bomb shelter, my Uncle Frank, or my dad's brother, ran into the front room, grabbed my dad, 6-month-old dad, out of his crib, and they ran downstairs into the basement, into the bomb shelter. And at that very second, a bomb went off in the street and blew out the front of the house. And my dad said that if he'd stayed in that crib, he would have been dead. The whole front of the house was gone. His crib was gone. He would not be alive today. And of course, I wouldn't be here, right? He wouldn't have met
Mm.
my mom. He wouldn't have had me and my sister. It's just a whole chain of events that would never have happened. Life would have gone in a different direction. Um, so yeah, I'm just blessed that things have happened the way they have, despite the heartache of losing my dad and losing my Mel and Doris, Allison's parents. Um, as hard as that is,
Mm.
I guess I don't know how else to put it, Richard. I wouldn't change a thing, right? Because we wouldn't be here today if we did, if we started changing things. Um, yeah, so I wouldn't change it as hard as
Yeah.
it might be.
It is kind of an extraordinary thing to think about in terms of the legacy that we leave behind.
Mm,
And I loved an interview that I did with a gentleman, not a rabbi, not long ago, who wrote a book about what will they say about you when you're gone. And um, I find it, pardon me, I find it interesting that we think about that, and there are some who actually are more concerned about that than
mm,
anything else. And so they go out and they try to do what Robert Bly in his book Iron John used to say, they're daring do, especially for
mm,
guys. I'm not sure
yeah,
if it's the same word for women, in that regard. But um it's like, wait a minute, I'm doing these programs and you're writing a book and I just published my book, and of course I don't have any kids to pass on whatever it is that I know. I have to pass it on to the people that are around me, younger than me, hopefully. Um, and I'd like to think that I'm making a difference in the world. I mean,
mm,
I think I'm making a difference in the world, and I get confirmation from some who say, you're doing great work and so forth. But again, I
yeah,
want to stay humble. I don't want to get ahead of myself in that regard. And
yeah,
it's it's uh, it's interesting when you observe other people
yeah,
who are, as I say, they're more concerned about their legacy than they are about what it is they're doing for mankind. Now, okay, it may be that is that's they're trying to help mankind, but it's like, I don't talk about this
mm,
in that sense. It's like, it's only after I am gone that whatever I left behind that's my legacy.
yeah,
Because for example, here's a weird thought, Richard.
mm-hmm,
If the internet suddenly disappeared, with the exception of the files that I have on a storage device here at home,
mm-hmm,
everything that I have created through the last 45 years, gone.
mm,
In other words, nobody has access to it anymore. Your book, for example, I mean, if someone has a hard copy of it, great. If it's a PDF, it's gone.
mm-hmm,
Those kinds of things. Um,
yeah,
when it comes to the coping aspect, are there particular coping mechanisms that you talk to people about that again, they work for you? Have you had enough? Have you connected with enough people to know that, in general, these coping mechanisms, if you will, if I can use that term, actually
yeah.
can work for most people?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much out there and so many things that we can do. Whether, if we go from one extreme to the other, if you feel you need to go to your doctor or see a psychiatrist or psychologist, There's that. Obviously, you can look at the medical side of things, and maybe you get some prescribed medication to help you. But then going to the other side, like I said before, just sitting outside in your back garden, just relaxing in the sun or even the rain with an umbrella, because I love being outside when it's raining. That can that can be calming too. But I've shared the whole, as much as I have researched them from my own personal experience, I've shared as much as I can, but I'm still learning. And people have written to me saying, "Thank you so much. I'm going to try that. I'm going to try this." Or they've written to me and said, "Yes, that worked." There's things, for example, the seasonal affect disorder, or SAD, appropriate. The seasonal affective disorder is a type of depression, where you're affected by the weather. During the winter, we find out that, we get lazy, we get tired, during the winter, it's dark and it's cold. So we kind of don't go out so much, right? We take naps on the sofa. We're not doing as much yard work. You're not going for a jog or riding your bike, or at least most of us aren't. But during the summer, it's the opposite. We want to be outside. We've got more energy. The days are longer. We love being out in the sun, and we feel a lot more happier in general. So even the weather, to that respect, the time of year can affect us. And we have to cope with that. We have to, if it's affecting us in a negative way, then we have to figure out a way of, okay, I need to understand it's just a phase I'm going through. Everything's okay. But there are a number of different things. And as I mentioned before, whether you want to go for a walk or whether you want to go to your local church when there's no service, because some people might want to go to church when it's not busy. You just want to sit quietly in a church. I know I do. But there's so many things. I did share last week with somebody who'd written to me. They lost their husband, and they were obviously deeply upset, and they were struggling to cope with it. And one of the things I shared with her was, do the things that you used to do with your husband. And something like, they had a dog and they used to walk the dog together. So I suggested, well, walk your dog and go the same route that you used to do with your husband. Or if you go to the local park and sit on a bench, that's where you sat with your husband, go to that same bench, sit in that same place, and it might be upsetting, but you'll feel closer to your husband by being there. And I think that helps a lot when you're going through this, when you're feeling lonely and lost, to sit in those places, to do those things that you used to do with your loved one. I don't see any harm in doing them. Maybe you went fishing with your grandfather who's just passed. Well, go to that spot and go fishing, maybe by yourself, but go fishing, and you'll feel closer to your grandfather. So there's a lot of things that I share. Yeah.
Holidays are just around the corner too, and that is a big challenge for a lot of folks. I will certainly remember 2019 because it was a trip that my wife and I took across country, so to speak, to Phoenix and up to Sedona, Arizona, and around the holidays, around Christmas. And it was one where, fortunately, we had the wherewithal to do this with the travel trailer, so that we could spend what did turn out to be the last Christmas the whole family was together, because my sister passed away the following year, March. And it's just really, really very interesting to have that experience of being with the family. I actually have a video that I took of one of the houses that when we went around looking at Christmas lights. I'm sure you've probably done that with the family, where in certain areas, certain neighborhoods, they've really done it up big, and with lights and video and this and that and the other. And this one house, apparently the owner of the house, the gentleman who lived there, either used to, he was retired, worked for Disney. So this was pretty doggone elaborate. It was amazing. But it was also amazing to spend that time with my eldest sister and the rest of the family and my brother-in-laws, who I consider more like brothers. I mean, it's kind of nice. I've got four sisters who are all married, and all four of them have made it abundantly clear after my father's passing that they would be around to take care of mom. And I thought, oh, this is great. I don't have four brother-in-laws. I have four brothers. And then, of
Mm.
course, my other brother. So actually, I have five. Don't want to leave Mike out. um, when someone passes, the closeness of the family is really important. And I know that a lot of people then start thinking about, unfortunately, they start thinking about the will, and what do I
Mm.
get? What do they leave me?
Mm.
And my parents sent us their last will and testament. And um, I remember reading through it because basically both of them were the same, with the exception that my mother gave my sisters her jewelry. Um, and I read through it, and for some reason, what went through my mind was, I didn't leave me anything. Well,
Mm.
that was not entirely true. There was a provision in there. Um, but I have always stated I don't want anything. They've already given me everything I could possibly want. I mean, obviously, my life. They gave me life, and
Mm.
they've been there, and they've been good friends. How important is family at these times, even if there are rifts? You think that rifts can be mended at those times too? I mean, it just seems to me that that's when you really need family.
Yeah, exactly. I think it can. If there was a rift before, I think during a time of loss, when you're both grieving for that same loss, it can bring you together. It can, maybe it's only a temporary time, but it can bring you back together. Like closeness that you had for years and years is suddenly there again, right? And it could be a new beginning for you, whether it's a rift between your brother and sister, or your aunties and uncles. It doesn't matter. Um, I noticed that at my dad's funeral, there was a lot of people there. It's a shame, isn't it, Richard? You don't see your family members all the time, but when there's a funeral, they're all there, or there's a lot of them there. And I wish that families would get together more often instead of just at the sad times. But there was a lot of rifts in my family, I can tell you that. And at that funeral, that was put to one side. We were all there to celebrate my dad's life and to comfort each other, and that's exactly what happened. Sadly, it was during COVID, so we could only have 30 people inside the church, but there was a lot more people standing outside, and we could all congregate out there and talk to each other. But yeah, I think it's at a time of loss, it can bring you back together.
I'm curious, did those rifts come back following, or did people really make a genuine effort to say, hey, you know what? We're family. You know, that's all that's
Yeah,
important.
I think sadly, from what I've heard now, some have mended, some rifts have gone, some are still there, and some have actually got worse. That's families, though, right, Rich? I mean, it's like that. That's I think everybody goes through that. We don't live in that Disney world where everybody lives happily ever after and everyone gets along. But I'd like to think that I could call on anybody in the family and they would help me as I would help them, um, because we are family. But yeah, sometimes it can work out for the best and sometimes it doesn't. But I think that's just human nature. We can be stubborn and we just won't let things go. And sometimes the issue that we're disagreeing about can be so trivial and so small, it's stupid.
Yeah.
Um, and we need to let it go because life is too short, as we know from losing our loved ones. We don't have time for that.
Yeah.
And we need to get along and enjoy as best we can.
Yeah. Well, my brother and I, we had an interesting conversation following my sister's memorial, and we were up until 1 o'clock in the morning. And once I realized kind of the direction this was going, I said to myself, no matter how this conversation ends, he is still your brother. All right.
Mhm.
And of course, we're on different sides of the political spectrum, and that's fine. Doesn't make either of us right or wrong. It's just we have different views. But in the conversation, we did realize that we did agree on three things that needed to be fixed or taken care of. Well, that's a start. We may not have agreed on how, but we did agree that there were three things that needed to be addressed. As far as our country's concerned.
Yeah.
But at the same time, and this to me goes even deeper, that conversation means absolutely nothing in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
100, 1,000, 10,000 years from now? Really? Is it, where is the relevance of that conversation in 1,000 years?
Yeah.
You know? And I hope that people will understand that what will be relevant is the the community that has been created and that hopefully has flourished since that time back there 100 or 1,000 years. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that's assuming that the Earth isn't hit by an asteroid and blown up. But that's, like, then we're all gone. Now, who's going to
Yeah.
grieve for us? But
Yeah.
I think that, again, in the grand scheme of things, I've used this analogy many times that, if the good Lord had intended for each one of us, 8.5 billion people, to live on individual solitary class M planets, I'm sure there are enough of them in the universe. They've gone trillion upon trillions of planets out there that, that we could all live on one, all by ourselves. However, the reality is we're all here together.
Mm.
And that speaks to me that we're supposed to work together, play together, live together, love together, and find ways of making life better for all of us. And you're doing that. You're doing that through the work that you are doing. We're talking with Rich Allen, and the website, once again, for those of you who are wanting to maybe get a copy of his book, which is entitled Keep Calm and Cope with Grief, 9 chapters for managing fear and grief when losing a parent or loved one. Website is richardjohnallen.com. We'll be linked to that website, Richard John Allen, and this is Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, and we are talking with Rich Allen about his work in the area of grief, and we're going to continue to do so. What was it that led you into this field? I'd like to think that you were focusing on this a little bit more before your father passed away, but so be it if that was the impetus. But was there something prior to that that said, this is important. We as a society, we need to be talking about these things and so on and so forth. What led
Yeah.
you to this?
It was actually my wife, Alison. I was working for an insurance company in the United States, one of the largest, and traveling America, teaching insurance. I was a commercial training specialist. And so I had nothing to do with grief or losing a loved one. But once I lost my father, grief was in my life. I'd never lost anybody close to me before like this. So I'd never experienced grief. And it was my wife, Alison, who said, Rich, you're a great communicator. You travel the country teaching at seminars. Why don't you put that skill in communication to sharing what you've learned about grief and coping with grief and how to organize a funeral, how to write a eulogy, the obituary. There's so many things, reading the will, as you mentioned before, signs from loved ones. Why don't you write a book? Now, my English is terrible. My spelling is awful. But I thought, well, okay, I'll try. So I started to doodle and make notes here and there. And long story short, I had 9 chapters and I sent it off to an editor to have it proofed for me. And they made some, grammar changes, if you will. And it came back and I put it up on Amazon and it was received so well. And the reviews on there are great. And I was like, wow. I was in shock. So I set up a website and I continued to write. And my books that I've written are all about the journey that I'm on, but it's also about my research because I'm constantly looking for answers. My second book, Life After This, I wrote that particular book because I was getting signs from my dad. And it was proof to me that there is a life after this. So I wanted to delve deeper into that topic about near-death experiences and what do these signs mean and how can we communicate with our loved ones if we choose to try. It's not as easy as picking up a telephone and saying, hey, Dad, are you there? We know we can't do that, but there are ways that we can try to communicate with our loved ones. Then I wrote Nature's Reach, which is all about nature and how nature can help us with grief. I wrote Look Up, which is a book for children who are trying to cope with grief and when they've lost a loved one. And then my latest book, which came out in May of this year, is called Heavenly Realms. And that is all about heaven because I had so many questions. Where do we go? What is this destination? Once we cross over to the other side, what is that place? I wanted to know, where is my dad? Is he there? And what is there? What is that place? So I did a lot of research. I spoke to priests. I spoke to all sorts of people. And again, I did my research and I share my own thoughts and my stories too. And again, signs from my dad are in that book too. So my books really tell this journey that I'm on. It's like a quest to trying to find these answers because there are
Hmm.
so many questions I have still. So,
Did you feel? By the way, I've had some wonderful conversations with priests. When I was married to my first wife, we were with the Byzantine Rite of the Catholic Church, and I'm glad that I had that experience. But the Monsignor, in this case, would come over. We'd go to people's houses, and I'm trying to remember which part of the year. I think it was right around Easter, to bless your house.
mm,
And he came over. We were living in a trailer at the time, and he would come over and he would start blessing the house. And he says, I have a question for you. He says, yeah, okay. I says, why is it that the crucifixes that we have on our walls or in the church or wherever it is, why, according to history, when a person is crucified, they're stripped naked. It's like the
mm,
final indignity, right?
yeah.
I says, why don't the crucifixes tell the truth? And I was genuinely surprised, but grateful for his honesty. And he basically said, in essence, we don't want to upset the sensibilities of the people. And I was taken aback at first by that, thinking, well, wait a minute. I thought the truth, you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free, you know?
Hmm.
I understand it. I don't necessarily, agree with that conclusion or the reasoning, but if that's the reason they're doing it, I appreciated his honesty in that. And I often wonder too, when you're talking about heaven, I had a guest on just yesterday who was telling this humorous joke about this man who was dying and he had all this gold under his bed. And and he's praying to God, said, please let me take it with me. Please let me take my gold with me. He says, no, you can't take it. Oh, please. I mean, he just really pressed. All right, I'll let you take it with you. So they bagged it all up, and when he died, he was able to take it with him. So he's in front of the pearly gates, and St. Peter's there, and says, okay, yeah. So you're what's in the bag? It's all my gold. He says, why are you bringing pavement to heaven? And I loved that. I loved that story that
Yeah.
she told. That was great. Um,
Yeah.
and I have to wonder sometimes with people who acquire things, what is this?
Mm.
What are you doing? I mean, honestly, I have two bookcases filled with books and boxes and containers filled with books that I
Mm.
need to get rid of. Primarily because I can't take them with me, and it might do somebody else some good to have them. Um, when we take a look at when you talked with these religious leaders, the priests in particular, but I'm sure you talked with other faith based individuals too, did you not?
Yeah. Yeah.
What was your overall consensus of their the overall consensus of the impression of what heaven is?
Yeah, that's interesting. You know what? It varied from person to person. And isn't that strange? I mean, they may have all have read the Bible. I personally have not read the Bible from front to back. the New Testament and Old Testament. I'm actually going through it now, but I'm only up to Exodus. And I have to say, it is so confusing. It blows my mind. And I can understand now why two people can read the Bible and walk away with totally different opinions about everything, the concept of heaven specifically. They can have different views and ideas about it, you know. There's I'm trying to think, I think it was 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 5, where it talks about some people have said to me, there is no life after this, and you can't talk to your loved ones, you know, when they've crossed over to heaven. That's it. They're over there and they're done. And I'm like, well, that's your opinion. Well, the Bible says so. And that's what they'll say to me. And I'll say, well, hang on a minute. So let me look. I looked into the Bible. And if you look at 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 5, it actually says, for there is one God and one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus. So I put that to a priest, and the priest said to me, what it means is you can pray to God. That is okay. And you can talk to your loved ones, but you can't pray to your loved ones. When you pray, it must only be to God. That's what the Bible is saying. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. I don't pray to my dad then. I just talk to my dad. So that's okay. If that's what the Bible is telling me, I think I'm okay. I'm good with that. But nowhere could I find, or did the priest tell me, no, you can't talk to your loved ones. But again, people have a different opinion from reading the same book, you know? And again, when we talk about heaven, there's a part, I'm trying to think of where it is, and it actually mentions there are 3 levels of heaven. And I was like, that's interesting. And this is in the Bible. And I was like, really? 3 levels of heaven? And again, I asked my priest back in Liverpool, the Catholic priest, and he said, well, there's 3 levels. I said, really? He goes, yeah. He said, there's heaven on earth, there's heaven above earth, which is basically our atmosphere, and there's heaven which is beyond our atmosphere in space. And he said, and that's where the Almighty God is, in the space. He fills that whole void, like the whole space around us. God is everywhere. But there are those 3 levels. And I'd never heard that before. I went to a Catholic school. My teachers were priests. And maybe it's just me getting old, but I couldn't remember being taught those things. But now I'm dealing with grief and I'm asking the questions. It blows my mind. But so going back to your point, Richard, I mean, different people have different points of view.
Yeah.
It's interesting to gather up all of these, all of this data, these points of view, you know, and it's fascinating to me.
What's been the reaction to that particular book by the people where you live, but also just in general by we'll refer to them as the religious as well as the non-religious?
Well, funny enough, I'd say 99% great. They loved it. I've had great conversations. If you look at the reviews of my books on Amazon, you know, they're all over 4-star. You know, yeah, there are some people who disagree with life after this, so they put 1 star. I get that. You know, that's their personal opinion. I totally understand it. But overwhelmingly, it's been positive. I will say this, at the last page of my books, the very last sentence reads, "May your God go with you." And I handed one of my books to a pastor, and he said, "I'm not going to use this." I said, "Why?" And he said, "May your God go with you." What do you mean, may your God? There's only one God, Richard. And he was upset by that sentence. And maybe it's just me, but the way I perceive God to be is going to be different to the way you perceive God to be, right? It can still be God, but it's as simple as if I said, okay, if God actually has an image, can you draw it for me? And you draw it and I draw it. It's going to be different. Mm-hmm. You know, we just have this different perception of who or what or how God is. So the last line of my books will say, "May your God go with you." That's all I was saying. But this particular pastor got upset with that, and he wasn't interested in the book. And I respect that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, others have embraced it. One or two have said, no, there's only one God.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating.
It truly is. I have to say, and also I've rare occurrences where the PR company that contacts me with a possible author for my program. And in particular, there was this one author who I think he was a pastor, and he'd written this particular book having to do with, I think it was Old Testament passage, if my people who are called by my name, et cetera, et cetera. And I forget the exact title, but I think it was part of that passage. And we were all good to go.
Mm,
Then he went to my website and he began to see the diversity and eclecticness, if you will,
mm,
of my guests. And he said no. And
mm,
the PR gal emailed me and she's no, he says no because he saw your website. And the one thing that came to mind was, and I asked her to pass this on to him, which apparently she did, and he still refused, was this. First of all, I am not disrespectful to any of my guests, regardless of where they're coming from. And he has no idea who's going to be listening at the time that the interview is aired on the radio, or who is going to listen to it or download it from the podcast or videocast locations. He has no clue.
mm.
So he is passing up an opportunity that I'm not going to say has passed him by. No, if he still wants to do the interview, I'm open to it because I was rather intrigued. Yeah, I'm going to
Mm,
have some challenging questions, but at the
mhm,
same time, I'm not going to be disrespectful because just as you've stated, we all have our different perspectives. We all have our different views. And my view of God, I mean, that's the other thing too. It says, we are all created in the image and the likeness of God, right? Well, wait a minute.
mhm,
Hold on. There are right now almost 8.5 billion people. How is that even possible that each one of us is created
mm.
in the likeness and the image of God?
Yeah,
Well, then you better figure out a new definition for image and likeness
yeah.
because that's what it says. I also take umbrage. I love using big words like that. I take umbrage with with those who like to talk about the 10 commandments, and I don't remember which number this is, thou shalt not kill, but they want to all of the sudden change the word kill to murder. And I'm sitting here going, so you're going to tell me that for the past 1,500 years, I think it's roughly, I think it was 500 or 600, maybe so far. I mean, I know they were handwriting, they were scribes and they
yeah.
were handwriting it, but not into English per se. Not until I think King Jimmy came along, but I'm not sure. But in any event, you're going to tell me, just for the sake of argument, that for 1,500 years it's been kill, and now all of a sudden you want to change it to murder because you say that the real translation of the word in whatever the language is that passage was written in is
Mm,
murder and not kill. And I just sat there going, I'm going, you have got to be kidding me. Then the word for death also has to be changed because it's appointed to every man once to die, one time, and then the judgment.
mm.
Immediately after you die, you get judged. Oh,
Yeah,
wait a minute. What about Lazarus? Oh, he must not have been dead. But it says that Jesus raised Lazarus from what? A coma?
yeah,
A deep sleep? No, it says dead. Do you want to change the word dead too? These are my observations. I am not casting aspersions. I'm asking questions, trying to understand, just like everyone else, and just like you were doing with
yeah,
your book about heaven. And I think
yeah.
that's fabulous. I really do.
And when you look at Islam, they believe there are seven different levels of heaven,
Yeah.
and Buddhism, there's 28 levels of heaven. So different religions, right? it's fascinating to me. We can all coexist. We can all have different beliefs, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, you just got to find what you believe. We
Yeah.
don't have to find it; can just happen, or you can ignore religion altogether.
Yeah.
But it's just fascinating to me. It
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah. What about Dante's Inferno? And what is it? The seven levels of hell?
Mm,
Is anybody challenging that? I don't think so.
yeah,
I haven't heard any challenges to that
yeah,
because they're not
yeah.
concerned with hell. They're more concerned with heaven.
That's
I'm
right.
just concerned with the here and the now, and
Hmm.
with you and I having this wonderful conversation about your work and in the area of grief. And sometimes conversations can be rather grievous too, but we try to avoid those kinds of
Yeah.
conversations. But also try to understand. And I just find it fascinating. RichardJohnAllen.com is the website. And, basically keep calm. Keep calm. That's what you want to do is stay calm. It's all going to be okay. Keep calm and cope with grief. It's the 9 chapters for managing fear and grief when losing a parent or a loved one. And we are so thankful that you have taken time. Once again, I really appreciate having you back on the program again to share these things. And I love talking with my namesake too.
It's the best name, isn't it?
It really is, ladies and gentlemen. It really is. And even if you have a girl, you can call her Richard. It's okay. Anyway, Richard, thank you. Thank you so much for giving us so much time here on the program. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I do want to ask you those 3 questions once again, because sometimes the answers change. But before I
Hmm.
do, I want to thank you folks for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m. And we are also here Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m. following the news, streaming live at those times at AM at richarddugan.com. We are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music. We're on YouTube where you can watch these conversations. And we hope that you will subscribe and click notification. We also want to let you know that Choices 5 Steps for Life is now out. It has been published. Yes, I finally did it. I finally published that darn thing, and it is now available in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle. Audiobook to come soon. Choices 5 Steps for Life. I hope that you'll get a copy, and I hope you'll leave a review as well. Let me know what you think. I would love to hear what you think of what I've put out as my first, but it won't be my last. I've got 3 other books just in mind right now, and in due time, I will be putting those out as well. But I'm going to enjoy the publication of this book for right now. If you would like to be a part of the work that we are doing financially, we would be gratefully appreciative. We thank those who have helped. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and those who will help in the future. We have a PayPal account. It's there for your security as well as ours. There's a link on my website, richarddugan.com, and you click on it and it'll take you there and probably fill in the email address. But if you're going there independently, they're going to ask you, who are you sending this to? Richard at richarddugan.com is the email address. That's richard at richarddugan.com. We also ask that you take time during this, the decade of perfect vision, to take time to go within and listen to that still small voice, especially during a time of grieving. I think that it will really be helpful. It's not really an area that we jumped into. Maybe the next time we have you on, Richard, we'll talk about that in terms of the inner life and how that can help us all to get through the grieving process. Maybe not easier, but it'll help. It won't. It can't hurt. I can guarantee you that it can't hurt. With all of that being said, we start with our 3 questions at the end of every program. And the first of those 3 questions to our guest is, who is Richard John Allen?
The son of John Allen. I'm very proud to have him as my father. So yeah, very proud.
What gets you up in the morning?
The smell of coffee. My wife always gets up and puts the coffee pot on, and I can smell it from the kitchen.
Mm. And finally, what was your best day?
My best day. Ooh, I've got so many. Oh my goodness. I'd have to say my wedding last year when Alice and I got married, the most recent best day. That was a day I'll never forget. Yeah, marrying my best friend.
Mm. Well, I can attest to that as well, having just been officially married on the 30th of June of this year. So
There
I'm
you
right there
go.
with you. Well, once
Yeah.
again, thank you so much for being with us here on the program. And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to law. Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Smokey, I will see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.